Hello everyone, apologies for the slight delay in starting, just a few technical issues. Thank you for bearing with us. So yes, let me crack on. I just wanted to welcome everyone to EBSI webinars. So we're starting season 2 of our economic development series with a look at our new GVA dataset and how it can be used to better understand productivity at the local level. I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Will Cookson. I'm the Business Development Manager for Economic Development at EBSI, and I'll be hosting today's webinar. Please feel free to ask any questions. There's a box within your control panel, it should be on the right-hand side of your screen. You can put any questions in there. I'll do my best to answer them at the end of the presentation. So without further ado, let's get going. So today, well, first of all, I'll give you an overview of what we're going to cover today. So we're going to be looking at GVA, what it is more importantly. We'll be looking at how we've added GVA to our Strength Finder methodology to look at clusters, and how GVA can be looked at a local level. We'll also be looking at how GVA can be used to benchmark productivity and impact, and also looking at how it can be used to understand the trade-off between jobs and productivity to inform decision making. So let's get right back to basics. GVA, what is it? GVA is essentially the value of goods and service minus the costs of production materials. So if we use the evergreen example of the widget is produced by a factory, then we have to minus the cost of the raw materials used to produce the widget and any energy that might have been purchased to fire up the machines to produce the widget. And then once you've taken away those costs of production, what you're left with is the GVA generated by the company that is producing the widgets. So roughly, GVA should equal the money businesses have to distribute to investors, i.e. their profits, to workers, salaries, and the government in their taxes. GVA is all about measuring production and not distribution. So it only tells us where the value is being generated, but not how it is being shared. So why does it matter? Why is it such an important and useful measurement? Well, it's not just jobs. The UK has high employment, but has been broadly stagnant in productivity for the past decade. So traditionally, we had an average annual rate of 2.3% GVA year on year for the decade preceding the recession in 2008. For the decade following the recession, that's dropped to 0.4%. So you can see that this is a reason that it's been deemed to be an important measurement, because it's about understanding our country's productivity as well as internationally. This sits behind policy initiatives like the government's industrial strategy, and it's therefore an important measure to better understand as the economy also changes with automation, with the challenges that may come with Brexit ahead, and also changes within our labour market and our local economies with traditional industries that delivering low productivity, but may potentially high volume of jobs, and newer industries such as, let's give an example of the digital industry, which can produce high GVA but far less jobs. We'll explore this further as we get into the webinar. It's also important for measuring productivity, stating the obvious here. But when we look at GVA and jobs data together, we can see where productivity is strong and weak at a local level and how that's changing. It can also be used as a measurement to look at impact, changes in the economy and their multiplier effects. We can see the ripple effect through productivity to look at total economic impact through looking at supply chains and so on. Again, we'll explore this further within the webinar. Just a minute to explain how we're using GVA and aligning that with our existing MZ labour market information. So the approach that we take to data is to ensure that it's local and detailed. So we've estimated GVA within our input-output economic models. We believe that's where it has the most strength. That allows us to take it down to local authority district level for each of the 4-digit industries that we look at. And we can do that currently up to 2014. If required, I should say, we can model earnings data to GVA at a local level up to 2017 at present. So this is Office of National Statistics, or ONS based, but with some differences. Although it reflects ONS data on regional GVA, there are some differences as our estimates reflect our economic models calculations of sales and wages as well, which helps us to understand the impact of GVA at a local level and also impacts within the supply chain. So I mentioned right at the start, we have put GVA data into our Strength Finder tool. I should say that previous webinars dig right into the methodology that sits around Strength Finder. But in brief, what we're looking at here is we're looking at our main page within the Strength Finder tool, and we're looking at Stroud, which is where I'm based and delivering this webinar from today. The key thing to recognise here is we're looking each of these bubbles are sized in relation to jobs, but they recognise a cluster. This a cluster basically shows the economic connections between different industries and how we can bring them together to get a simpler view of your local economy. On the x-axis, you've got the location quotient, which basically shows the concentration and the comparative advantage you might have. So anything over to the right is significant for Stroud. And then on the y-axis, you've got national change, so either growth or decline. And that's mapped over an area, over a time frame that you set. Here we're looking at 2017 to 2022. Now, if you hover over any one of these clusters, then you'll be able to see essentially some metrics for that cluster. And the one we've hovered over here is precision technology. So this gives us an idea of the total jobs by 2022. The location quotient, 6.2, quite significant. The average earnings, the national job growth is projected over this time frame, although you can vary that to look historically going back to 2003, and also the GVA set at 2014, and also the percentage of the total GVA. Here we're looking at precision technology. This will be, we've got a lot of engineering firms in this area, and so that will reflect that. If we flick on, you can then click in within this, you can click on each of these clusters. We can look at how GVA has been modelled within that. So here on this top line, you've got earnings. You can then look at the earnings, essentially our wages, pension contributions, and so on. You've got the capital income, which will be the money that goes to investors. It'll also be the profit and interest. Then you've got the taxes, essentially the money that will go to government. This is taxes that directly affect the business. This will be what's paid out less any subsidies. And then you've got the total GVA. And as you can see below, you can dig down to that 4-digit standard industry classification in level. So you can look at each individual industry within the cluster, and you can look at the GVA. So that almost far right column there is GVA by each of the industries. Just wanted to show you how it's been incorporated into our Strength Finder tool. So how do we use GVA to understand the economy? It's about understanding the local strength composition. And as I mentioned before, that trade-off between high value high productivity industries and low value, low productivity industries that may provide a higher volume of jobs. And this is about supporting organisations like local enterprise partnerships and like local authorities and the work that we do with them to understand, to inform their decision making and understand how this can, how they can target the resources and capacity they've got and what interventions they may want to target. So we can use GVA to understand how different industries and clusters generate value and contribute to economic impact. But by bringing GVA and jobs data together, that allows us to explore productivity and potentially the trade-offs on offer as different industries grow. So let's explore that in a bit more detail. Okay, here we're looking at GVA and value generation, and we focused in on the Leicester and Leicestershire Enterprise Partnership region, which we've recently completed some work with them. We thought it'd be interesting to look at how we can use the MZ GVA data, which has been estimated to align with our input-output model. So we can look at here we're looking at a particular cluster, we're looking at logistics and e-commerce, and we can look at, as you can see, this large column on the left-hand side is the total sales, and the anything above 0 is the value that's been the GVA that's been created. But then we can also look at that in more detail, so we can see the next column along is import. So that's imported purchases that are being made within the supply chain of that cluster, and that equates to 457 million. When we say imported, that means it's imported out of the area that we're looking at, so out of that Leicester and Leicestershire Enterprise Partnership area. Then we've got local purchases. These are purchases equating to 295 million that have been purchased locally. This can inform decision makers about whether it's possible to grow that local supply chain and essentially, what opportunities there may be to further support businesses. So once we get above the 0 line, you can see here we can break down the GVA in terms of the labour. So essentially the wages, which is equivalent to 526 million. You've then got the capital, which is 132 million. You can see the line there in regards to which is 17 million, which is around state, which will be taxes, less any subsidies. And then you've got the total, 675 million, in regards to the GVA generated by the logistics and e-commerce cluster in that area. We can explore the GVA consequences of a major industry cluster, staying with logistics and e-commerce, but we can look at what is happening within this supply chain. So that total figure on the far left, the 888 million, is the total value there. But then we can look at the next column along, which will be the GVA created by the logistics and e-commerce cluster. That's the 675 million. And then you've got the direct impact of the supply chain, which is 123 million. And then you've got the indirect. And then you can see what you can look at. The indirect is created by purchases by the supply chain. So those are the purchases that are made outside of the GVA generated by that logistics and e-commerce cluster. And then you've got the induced, which will be the GVA created by the workforce based in the local area. So this essentially captures the industry itself and what it generates, what they buy, what the supply chain then buys, and what the workers buy. So we can break it down and look at the impact more broadly at a local level. Now, I thought this would be interesting to look at. So here we're looking at productivity diversity across industry clusters. So we've looked at high level clusters here, and we're looking at GVA by job over the time frame of 2011 to 2017. Now, this is interesting in terms of looking at, obviously, there are great variances here with particular clusters generating far more GVA by job. So air transport stands out there, but also financial and legal services. But these may well not be the largest, and probably are not the largest employers. So, for example, down here on the second line from the bottom, you've got property development right next to retail. Interesting to look at that in terms of, obviously, property development and digital, for example, have very high GVA by job, but not necessarily a huge number of jobs. Whereas if we look at visitor economy, just below property development, or we look at retail, low GVA by job, but create employment where it's really needed, open, entry-level jobs, seasonal employment, very important to particular local economies. But it's interesting to look at that in terms of productivity. It shows the type of analysis that we can do. Then we've got some benchmarking. So here we're back to Leicester and Leicestershire. But what we're looking at here is we're looking at a comparison with the national picture and the regional. So we're looking still at logistics and e-commerce. And we can see that the logistics and e-commerce cluster within Leicester and Leicestershire Enterprise Partnership area lags behind the national. And there could be good reasons for that. It could be because knowing as we do the logistics and e-commerce cluster within Leicester and Leicestershire, we know that it's weighted more towards the logistics side of that, which will tend to generate or will generate less GVA than the e-commerce side of that cluster. But you can see there a national comparison and a comparison with the wider government office region of the East Midlands. Okay, this is quite an interesting one. So here we're looking at productivity by jobs. So the width of the bars that we're looking at here on this graph are the number of jobs within each of these clusters. And we've gone for really high level clusters here just so we can look at broad comparisons. So the width of the bars is the number of jobs. The height of the bars is the GVA per job, i.e. the productivity, and then the total area is equal to the GVA. So we're looking at 7 big industry blocks here. And what's interesting here is if we look at the detail, the difference, between finance and retail, for example, in 2011, you can see that finance significantly less jobs, but much higher GVA per job. Also, it's interesting to look that over this time period, if we look over to the right-hand side, you can see that retail services and logistics overtook public administration, education, and health. Obviously, we've seen significant changes within public administration, but still that change is quite an interesting one to capture there. Okay, your eyes aren't going funny. This graph is actually moving. So what we can see here is we're looking at changes over time. So we're comparing jobs, workplaces, and output to see how a regional economy, in this instance, East Midlands, changes over time. So these are the 7 high-level clusters that we talked about. But what we can see is how jobs, establishments, and outputs change over the period. And you can see as each year changes, it moves. Now, I will send this presentation out because I'm sure you'll be mesmerized and hypnotized by this as I have been. And I should say a big thank you to our senior economist, Duncan Brown, who likes to create these whizzy things. So moving on, here we're moving way across the country to Hampshire. And that's partly because I want to be able to show you how we can look at economic activity clusters geographically. So as I said, we're looking at Hampshire. Last week, we took part in the Hampshire County Council's 2050 commission, where we met with commissioners and provided some data to help them with their thoughts and their planning around commissioning activity. But this helps you to see that economic activity is not evenly distributed, even in a relatively small area, such as the county of Hampshire. So you can see right in the centre, and obviously you look at the output per job on the right hand side, this dark navy blue, low output per job, going up to the yellow, very high output per job. The right in the centre of the county, really low economic activity when compared to the north and northeast of the region, where you have Farnborough and Fleet. And that yellow in the south by the coast is Waterlooville, where you have Kinetic based, a large and very productive defence R&D company. So you can start to understand how you can unpick a local geography to understand productivity at that level. So obviously what we've done here is we've taken a whiz through what we think we can do with our GVA. It's reasonably new. We've added it into a number of our software tools, including Strength Finder and Analyst. But we can also, we also have integrated it within our offer in regards to our consulting activity. Now, we'll be sharing further analysis through our blog and through future webinars. We will also be at this year's IED conference, where Duncan Brown, our senior economist, will be speaking, but we'll also have a stand there. And we'll be doing some activity around that, which I think will be of interest. I should also say, do make contact with myself to explore how we may be able to help you understand jobs and productivity in your area. So it's a bit of a whistle-stop tour today. I should say we have a number of economic development support materials on our website. So our website is economic modelling with 2 L's, not spelled the American way, .co.uk. If you look under the resources tab, you can find a number of guides and other published materials that may well be of interest to you and your activity. The one that sprung to mind for me was the 3 steps to building a better local economic growth strategy. If you've not seen that, really useful guide that we've created. Our next webinar will be on Tuesday the 13th of November at 11 AM. This will be looking at targeting inclusive growth within your local economy. The title may change slightly, but that's the focus of the webinar. Will be looking at how we can look at differences within a local economy in order to look at how that can be used to target inclusive growth. So I'd just like to thank you. My contact details are here. Do make contact if you would like to find out more, if you have any particular questions. I'm just going to check here whether we have any questions that have been raised within the webinar itself. No questions. I'm assuming that's a good thing, but if things do occur to you afterwards, please do email me. My email address is here, and as I said, I'll be sharing these slides. Happy to take questions about specific local areas as well. So if you might want some insight in regards to your particular area, just fire me a question. Okay, thank you for your time. Hope you found it of interest. And like I said, our next webinar will be on the sorry, bear with me 1 second. Our next webinar will be in the middle of November, on Tuesday the 13th of November to be precise, at 11 AM. Thanks a lot. Take care. Bye-bye.